Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. As always, we are ready to go deep. And today, well, we're diving into something pretty creepy.
Yeah, we
We're
are.
talking about Annabelle,
The Annabelle doll.
which I think most people will know from the movies.
Absolutely.
But we are going to kind of pull back the curtain
Yeah.
on the Hollywood version of Annabelle
Mm.
and look at kind of what the real story is, or at least the
Yeah.
story that has been reported.
Exactly.
We have a very detailed podcast script here as our source
Right.
to kind of guide this deep dive.
Okay, yeah, it's amazing how something as simple as like a child's doll
Yeah.
can become, this huge symbol of fear. Like
Right.
it's really fascinating. And
Right.
and I think, as we're going through this, it's good for everybody to keep in mind the
Yeah.
distinction between what we see on screen
Yeah.
and then, the original claims or the original stories about
Yeah.
whatever this object is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. Our source tells us that back in 1970, there was a nursing student named Donna,
Okay.
and she received a vintage Raggedy Ann doll as a gift from her mother.
Seems innocent enough.
Right. You would think so.
Yeah.
But apparently this doll very quickly
Yeah.
became the center of a lot of really disturbing and weird events.
Yeah, like what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, so our source details these initial events, and they're kind of the things that I think,
Yeah.
would make anybody pause.
Right.
They would find these handwritten notes
Okay.
appearing in their apartment
Uh-huh.
with these childlike scribbles
Okay.
saying things like, "Help us."
That's creepy. Like it taps into this very like primal fear we have,
Yeah,
Or
totally.
I don't know.
And I think that's kind of a theme that we see
Mhm.
with a lot of these hauntings or these objects is that,
Yeah.
it's something that's so simple,
Yeah.
like a child's doll. And then you have these messages that are like,
They're like pleading for help.
yeah, like help us.
Mm.
But it's in this like creepy childlike.
Yeah, it's like the juxtaposition of the two things is what makes it
Yeah.
so unsettling.
Totally. And it wasn't just notes though.
Oh, there's more.
Oh yeah. So the doll reportedly started to move on its own.
Oh, okay.
So, our source will detail how Donna and her roommate Angie,
Mhm.
they'd leave the doll in one place, like on the couch,
Yeah.
and then later they would find it in a completely different room.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
Like, how does that even...
like what does that kind of unexplained movement suggest?
Yeah, like, what does that mean?
Typically, obviously this is all, paranormal and speculative.
Yeah.
But a lot of times these kinds of small movements are interpreted as like the first signs of a presence.
Yeah.
Like something testing boundaries or,
Yeah.
or trying to communicate in a way that,
Yeah.
isn't completely clear.
Right, so just like little subtle hints.
Yeah, exactly. It's like building suspense, Things aren't quite right.
Right.
There's something else at play in their environment.
Okay, so it starts with the notes.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get movement.
Right.
And then it escalates even further.
Oh, no.
Our source reports alleged screams coming from the doll.
That's a big jump
Right.
in intensity.
Huge jump.
I mean, you go from like, notes and then like a little bit of movement to
Right.
like auditory,
Yeah.
screaming. That's
Terrifying.
very unsettling.
And I think especially when you attribute a sound like that to an inanimate object.
Right. It's not like you're hearing like disembodied voices.
Yeah,
Like
doll.
it's coming from the doll.
It's coming from the doll.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really scary.
Absolutely.
I mean, it moves beyond like the visual into
Yeah.
something more visceral and alarming,
Right.
suggesting a potential increase in whatever this force is,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we have these notes, we have the movement, we have these screams.
Yeah.
Then our source recounts a really frightening experience involving their friend Lou,
Okay.
who was reportedly woken up one night
Uh-huh.
to find the doll gripping his neck.
Oh my gosh. So like direct physical interaction.
Yeah, like what kind of impact does something like that have on a person?
I mean, that's
I mean, think about it.
That's like textbook, like a haunting or
Yeah.
demonic activity,
Mm,
like
yeah.
a direct physical encounter,
Yeah.
whether it's perceived or real,
Right.
often solidifies that belief,
Yeah.
that something malevolent is there and,
Yeah.
and actively hostile.
Right, because now it's like,
Yeah,
it's not just moving around the apartment.
now you're being targeted.
Right.
It's not just passive observation. It's
Yeah.
I am being,
Yeah.
affected by this thing.
Attacked. almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially.
So then after all this happens,
Yeah.
Donna and Angie reportedly hold a seance.
And during the seance, they claim to have contacted a spirit,
Mm-hmm.
calling itself Annabelle Higgins.
Annabelle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who supposedly was a young girl who died on the property.
Okay, so that's classic ghost story stuff right there.
Right.
You know, identify an entity,
Right.
give it a name, give it a backstory.
Yeah, like, why is that so important, do you think, in these cases?
I think naming provides a sense of understanding or control, even if it's illusory.
Oh,
You know, it's like, oh,
yeah.
okay, we know what we're dealing with now. It's Annabelle. You know, but also I think identifying the spirit as like a specific individual
Yeah.
can humanize the experience. So it becomes less like this random, terrifying event
Right.
and more like, okay, this is, you know, maybe an interaction with like a disembodied person
Right.
who has a history and a reason for being there.
Okay, so you're not just dealing with like a random force.
Exactly.
You're dealing with like a person who might have motivations.
Right. It's Annabelle.
Yeah. But then it gets a little more complicated because then we get the involvement of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
The Warrens.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they asserted that whatever was happening with this doll wasn't the spirit of a child at all.
Oh, so that completely changes things. I mean, we
Right.
go from, you know, potentially a harmless or a lost child spirit to something else entirely.
Yeah, like what does that do to the story?
Well, it kind of ups the stakes a little bit.
Right. It raises the level of threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, now we're not dealing with, you know, little Annabelle.
Right.
Who, you know, maybe just wants to play or something. It's something else.
Yeah.
Something potentially much more sinister.
Right. And this is kind of where we start to separate from the popular image of Annabelle.
Yeah.
Because most people, when they think of Annabelle, they probably picture...
Like a creepy porcelain doll, right?
Yeah, they think of that creepy porcelain doll from the Conjuring movies.
Right.
But the actual Annabelle, according to our source, is just a simple cloth Raggedy Ann doll.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So totally different.
Yeah. So why do you think that... Why make that change for the movies?
Well, I mean, think about it visually.
Yeah.
You know, the menacing porcelain doll is inherently unsettling.
Right.
Whereas the Raggedy Ann doll is supposed to be, you know,
it's supposed to be cute
and friendly and, you know. So the fact that the real doll is so ordinary,
right,
I think highlights this idea that the object itself may not be the source of the phenomena, but rather a focal point or a conduit for something else entirely.
So it's not the doll itself, it's something else.
Oh, exactly.
And this is in line with something that Ed Warren said.
Okay.
He called the doll a bait doll.
Bait doll.
Yeah, emphasizing that the real significance isn't the doll itself, but the force inside it.
Okay, so if the doll is just bait,
right,
what are they actually dealing with?
Yeah, what is this force? What do the Warrens think they're dealing with?
Well, the term bait doll implies that they believe the doll was attracting or being used by a non-human entity, something demonic or malevolent, rather than the spirit of a deceased person.
Okay, so not a ghost.
Not necessarily, no.
Something else.
Right.
Something darker.
Potentially, yeah.
So the doll itself is almost like a magnet.
Yeah, like a beacon.
Yeah.
For this negative energy.
And, you know, speaking of the movies, our source makes it very clear that the Warrens considered the Annabelle movies to be pure fiction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So not even based on a true story?
No.
Okay.
So for you listening, if you've seen the Annabelle movies, you know that's not what happened.
Right, that's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood.
Taking creative liberties, which happens a lot with these types of stories.
Absolutely.
You know, they got to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then in 1972, the Warrens take possession of the doll.
They take the doll?
Yeah. And Lorraine Warren is quoted in our source describing the doll as pure evil.
Pure evil.
Yeah. And I mean, she's someone who, you know, has a lot of experience in this field.
Yeah.
So what weight do you think someone who believes in her work would give to a statement like that?
I mean, that's a huge statement.
Right.
You know, to call something pure evil that suggests this deep-seated malevolence, something inherently dangerous.
Yeah.
Something to be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely. And after taking possession of the doll, they took some pretty extreme measures.
Oh, okay.
So they sealed the doll.
Wow.
In a sacred glass case.
In a glass case.
Yeah.
Wow.
With the warning on it that says, do not open.
Oh, so it's like they're containing
Yeah.
this dangerous entity.
Yeah, like what does that kind of containment signify in these stories?
I mean, I think it really underscores the perceived danger.
Right.
It's like a physical manifestation of this belief that, you know, whatever is associated with this doll needs to be contained to prevent harm.
So it's not enough to just have it in their possession.
Right. It can't just be sitting on a shelf.
They have to lock it away.
It needs to be contained.
And there's this pretty unsettling anecdote in our source about a visitor to the museum who mocked the doll.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And then reportedly died in a motorcycle crash just hours later.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. So, I mean, these stories are definitely dramatic. And they add to the whole lore and legend of Annabelle.
Right.
But it's really important to remember that, you know, anecdotal evidence has its limitations. Like to say that, you know, oh, this person mocked the doll.
Right.
And then they died because of the doll. It's almost impossible to, you know, prove that.
But it's still creepy, right?
It is creepy.
Like it makes you wonder.
It does. It makes you wonder.
If maybe there's something to it. So currently, Annabelle is said to reside in the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut.
Okay.
And our source notes that it's guarded by prayers and a priest's blessings.
So they're bringing in like the religious element here.
Yeah. So why do you think that is?
Well, I think incorporating these religious elements into the containment reflects a belief that the threat is spiritual in nature.
Okay.
And therefore requires spiritual countermeasures.
Okay.
So it's like they're trying to create this protective barrier using religious power.
So prayers, blessings.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to keep that evil contained.
And the museum, as our source mentions, closed to the public in 2019.
Okay.
But Tony Spera, who's the caretaker of the museum, he claims that Annabelle remains active.
Active?
Yeah.
What does that even mean for a doll?
Right.
Active?
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, in this context, I think active means that the phenomena associated with the doll, the unusual occurrences, the negative energies, the sense of a presence are still being perceived by those who are close to it.
So even though it's locked away.
Right. It's still doing something.
It's still there. Now, our source also has this really interesting listener anecdote from someone named Mia in Vermont.
Okay.
And Mia shares this story about her daughter's doll supposedly whispering after they watched one of the Annabelle movies.
Oh, wow. So like life imitating art.
Right. And it gets even creepier.
Oh, no.
Because they reportedly burned the doll. And could still hear giggles.
They burned the doll and still heard giggles.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So, I mean, what do you think about this? Like, how does something like that, that's like seemingly triggered by the movie, play into everything?
I think it's a perfect example of how powerful, you know, narrative suggestion and perception can be.
Right. Because they watched this movie.
Right.
And now they're hyper aware.
Exactly. And their senses are heightened. And maybe they're misinterpreting, you know, normal sounds or
So it's like the movie almost planted the seed for them to experience something like that.
That's the power of suggestion.
And the source asks the question, coincidence or curse?
That's a good question. I mean, it really makes you think about what we believe. And what's real and what's not.
And how much of this is our minds playing tricks on us.
Right, because we as humans, we like to find patterns and connections. And especially with things that we don't understand. Like we like to, you know, create narratives and come up with explanations.
Especially if those explanations are exciting or scary.
Right, exactly. And it's like, I mean, who doesn't love a good ghost story?
So as we wrap up our deep dive on the story of Annabelle, the key thing to remember from our source is that, you know, the real Raggedy Ann doll and the scary figure that we see in the movies are very, very different.
Totally.
And the Warrens maintained that this doll itself was just a bait doll.
Right.
And the real horror was this force or entity that was attached to it.
Yeah, this unseen force.
Yeah. So it wasn't the doll itself.
No.
So after hearing all this and, you know, all the different stories and accounts, what do you think? Like, what does the story of Annabelle tell us?
I think it's fascinating how much we, you know, as humans crave these explanations for things that we don't understand. And I think, you know, objects like this doll become these lightning rods for our fears and anxieties.
I guess it's not really about the doll.
Exactly.
It's about what the doll represents.
Right. It's about this fear of the unknown, this fear of the darkness.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. So think about that.
Yeah.
How much of this is real? How much of this is our minds, making connections and finding patterns where maybe there aren't any?
And how much of it do we want to be real?
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely food for thought.
Yeah.
For everybody listening.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
See you next time.